I could leave you right now." That's what my wife said to me at a party in front of our friends. Everyone went silent. They expected me to laugh it off like I always did. Instead, the two words I said changed everything. My name is Alan, and that moment was the beginning of the end of my marriage, and the start of discovering just how deep the betrayal really went. I met Susan when I was 25. We started talking the night I got her number, and the conversation flowed easily. When she spoke about the future, it sounded like we wanted the same things. We dated for about a year and a half before we got married. The wedding was simple with just family and close friends. Those first couple of years were good. I'm not going to sit here and tell you they were perfect, because they weren't. No marriage is. But they were good enough. We both worked. I made more money than she did, but that never seemed to bother her. She had a steady job that she seemed happy with, and I was climbing the ladder in my field. We'd come home at the end of the day, cook dinner together, and talk about our plans. We talked about the future a lot. We both agreed we wanted children, just not right away. We wanted to be financially stable first, to have a solid foundation. That made sense to me. The conversation about having children kept getting pushed further and further away. Every time I brought it up, Susan had a reason why we should wait. She wanted to get a promotion at work first. She wanted to advance in her career. We needed to save more money. The timing wasn't right. There was always something. And because I thought we were partners, I agreed to wait. I trusted her. I thought she wanted the same things I did, just on a different timeline. Finally, after years of waiting, we agreed to start trying. I felt this surge of hope, this feeling that this could bring us closer together. I believed we were actively working toward starting a family. Months passed. Nothing happened. I tried not to worry at first. I knew it could take time. But then 6 months passed. Then a year. Then more. I started to feel concerned. I suggested we see a doctor and get some tests to determine whether there was a medical issue. Maybe something was wrong with me. Perhaps something was wrong with her. But Susan always had an excuse to avoid it. She'd say it was too expensive, that our insurance wouldn't cover it. She'd say we should give it more time, that we were still young. She'd tell me she'd read articles online about how it could take years for some couples to conceive naturally, that we just needed to be patient. I felt disappointed and confused. Why wasn't this happening? I started to feel inadequate, like maybe there was something wrong with my body, like I wasn't capable of giving her what we both supposedly wanted. I worried constantly. But what struck me as strange was that Susan didn't seem worried at all. She seemed almost unconcerned about the whole thing. When I'd bring up my concerns, she'd brush them off, tell me I was overthinking it, and tell me to relax. I found that odd, but I told myself she was just less anxious than I was, that she was better at staying calm under pressure. I had no idea what was really happening. Somewhere around year 5, things started to change. It was subtle at first. The intimacy between us began to fade. What used to be a regular part of our relationship started happening less. At first, I didn't think much of it. People get busy. Work gets stressful. Life gets in the way. But then, the occasional became rare. And rare became rare. I'd initiate, and Susan would have a reason why not. She was tired from work. She had a big presentation coming up and was stressed. She wasn't feeling well. She just wasn't in the mood. I didn't want to be that guy who pressured his wife or made her feel uncomfortable. So I backed off. I told myself it was just a phase, something all couples go through. If I were patient and understanding, things would get back to normal. But months passed and nothing changed. Then a year passed. Then more. I started to feel rejected. I began to feel unwanted. I'd lie in bed at night next to her, and it felt like there was this wall between us that I couldn't break through. I tried to talk to her about it. I'd bring it up gently, trying not to sound accusatory or demanding. She'd promise that things would get better. She'd say she knew we needed to work on it, that she'd try harder. But nothing ever changed. The promises were empty. I started to wonder what was wrong. Was it me? Had I done something to push her away? Had I gained weight? Was I not attractive to her anymore? Had she fallen out of love with me? The constant rejection started to eat away at my confidence. I'd look at myself in the mirror and wonder what was wrong with me. But I kept trying to be patient. I kept trying to understand. I kept telling myself that if I just gave her more time, more space, more understanding, things would improve. They didn't. And as the intimacy disappeared, other things started to change too. Susan's whole attitude toward me shifted. She became dismissive of my opinions. If I shared how I felt about something, she'd act like my feelings didn't matter. When we disagreed about something, which started happening more and more often, she wouldn't talk it through with me. She'd either shut down completely, giving me the silent treatment, or she'd just walk away in the middle of the conversation. It was like she couldn't be bothered to work through anything with me anymore. And if she didn't get her way about something, the temperature in the house would drop. She'd subtly insult my friends, criticize my family, and find fault with things they said or did. I found myself walking on eggshells around her, constantly trying to gauge her mood and avoid saying or doing anything that might set her off. I became the person who always apologized and tried to make peace, even when I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. It was exhausting. She seemed to resent my very existence, and I had no idea why. I kept asking myself what I'd done wrong, what had changed, but I never got any answers. One Saturday night, at our friend's house, we had one of those casual get-togethers where a bunch of couples show up with wine and beer, stand around the kitchen and living room, and just talk. Susan and I had been to dozens of these over the years. This one should have been no different, but it turned out to be the night everything changed, even though I didn't fully understand it at the time. We'd been there for an hour or two. I was nursing a beer, Susan had a glass of wine, and we were standing in the corner of the living room with 4 or 5 other people. I don't even remember who brought it up, but somehow the conversation shifted to divorce. Someone mentioned a mutual friend whose marriage had just ended, and that opened the floodgates. People started talking about how common divorce seemed to be now, how couples didn't seem to try as hard as they used to, how easy it was just to walk away when things got difficult. I was half listening, half thinking about other things when I decided to add my 2 cents. I said something like, "Yeah, I think a lot of women who leave their husbands think the grass is greener on the other side. They think there's something better out there, but they don't realize what they're giving up." I wasn't aiming that comment at Susan. I wasn't trying to start anything. I contributed to the conversation, sharing my thoughts on the topic. It was a general observation, nothing more. But Susan laughed and said to me, "I could leave you right now." She had this look on her face, like she was daring me, like she was making a joke at my expense and expecting everyone to laugh along with her. Nobody laughed. There was this immediate, uncomfortable silence. I felt my face get hot. I felt humiliated, standing there in front of her friends. This wasn't the first time she disrespected me, but it was the first time she'd done it so openly with witnesses. So instead of doing what I usually did, laughing it off, changing the subject, making some self-deprecating joke to ease the tension, I just looked at her right in the eyes, and I said, "Go ahead." The look on her face was something I'll never forget. Her smile faltered. Her eyes widened just a little. She was genuinely surprised, maybe even shocked. She'd expected me to back down like I always did. She'd expected me to play along, to let her have her moment, to be the good sport. But I didn't. I called her bluff right there in front of everyone. Someone in the group jumped in and changed the subject, started talking about something else entirely, trying to move past the awkward moment. The conversation shifted, people started talking again, and the tension eased. But the damage was done. Susan didn't say much for the rest of the night. We left 30 minutes later. The drive home was silent. She stared out the window. I focused on the road. Neither of us said a word. And in that moment, I realized that I was tired. Tired of being disrespected. Tired of being the punchline. Tired of always being the one who had to smooth things over and pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Tired of trying so hard in a marriage where I felt like I was the only one trying at all. After that party, Susan stopped talking to me. Not completely, but close to it. She gave me the cold treatment, the kind where you're technically being polite, but there's ice in every word. If I asked her a question, she'd answer with the bare minimum. Yes. No. Fine. Whatever. She wouldn't look at me when she spoke. She'd walk into her room, see me there, and walk right back out. At night, she'd go to bed early or stay up late on her phone, anything to avoid being in the same space as me. She was acting like I'd committed some terrible crime. Like I was the one who'd done something wrong. In her mind, I'd embarrassed her in front of our friends. I'd disrespected her by not backing down, by not apologizing, by not playing my usual role of the husband who keeps the peace no matter what. She wanted me to come crawling back, to say I was sorry, to beg for her forgiveness so things could go back to normal. And here's the thing, usually I would have. That's precisely what I would have done. I would have apologized within a day or two, even if I didn't think I'd done anything wrong. I would have tried to smooth things over, wanted to talk it out, tried to fix whatever was broken. I'd spent years doing that. Years of being the one who compromised, who bent, who made things right. It was exhausting, but it was the pattern we'd fallen into, and I'd accepted it as just the way our marriage worked. But this time, I didn't do any of that. I didn't apologize. I didn't try to fix it. I didn't chase after her or beg her to talk to me. I just let the silence sit there between us. I was tired. So I decided, consciously or not, that I wasn't going to be the one to break this time. If she wanted to be silent, fine. We'd be quiet. Days passed. One day turned into 3, then 5, then a week, then almost 2 weeks. We lived in the same house, but we might as well have been strangers. We'd pass each other in the hallway without a word. We'd eat dinner at different times. I'd be in the living room, she'd be in the bedroom. She'd be in the kitchen, I'd be outside. It was like we were two people coexisting in the same space, but living completely separate lives. During those 2 weeks, I had a lot of time to think. About my marriage. About Susan. About myself. About what my life had become. And for the first time in years, I started to see things clearly. I began to see my marriage for what it really was, not what I'd been pretending it was or hoping it would become. It was a Tuesday morning, about 12 or 13 days into the silence. I woke up around 7:30. Susan was already up. I could hear her in the bathroom getting ready for work. I was just lying there in bed, staring at the ceiling, and this thought popped into my head, clear as anything. Why am I doing this? It wasn't an emotional thought. I wasn't angry or sad in that moment. It was just a simple, honest question. Why was I staying in this marriage? What was I getting out of it? What was the point? So I started going through the facts in my head, as if I were making a list. There was no intimacy. We hadn't been intimate in years. That part of our marriage had died a long time ago, and every attempt I'd made to talk about it or fix it had gone nowhere. There was no respect. Susan dismissed my opinions, insulted me, and made me feel small. She just publicly humiliated me at a party, and this wasn't the first time she treated me like I didn't matter. There was no partnership. We didn't make decisions together. She did what she wanted, and if I didn't go along with it, she'd punish me with silence or coldness or cutting remarks. There were no children. We'd been talking about having kids for years, and it still hadn't happened. I didn't understand why, but it seemed like it would never happen. There was no affection. She didn't touch me, didn't hug me, didn't show any warmth toward me at all. There was no friendship. We didn't laugh together. We didn't enjoy each other's company. We barely even talked anymore unless we had to. There was no joy. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt genuinely happy in my own home. I was living with someone who treated me like an inconvenience, like a roommate she resented sharing space with. And I was miserable. Genuinely, deeply sad. I'd been miserable for years, but I've been so focused on trying to fix things, on trying to make the marriage work, that I hadn't stopped to ask myself the most basic question. Why am I staying? The realization wasn't dramatic. It was just this quiet, calm understanding that settled over me as I lay there in bed listening to Susan get ready in the other room. There was no reason to stay married. Not one. I'd been holding on to the idea of my marriage, the hope that things would get better, the fear of admitting failure. But the actual marriage, the day-to-day reality of it, had been dead for a long time. I'd just been too afraid or too stubborn to admit it. That morning, lying in that bed, I made a decision. I was going to get a divorce. I didn't tell Susan right away. I wanted to understand what I was getting into first, what the process would look like, and what my options were. So, within a few days of that morning realization, I started looking up divorce attorneys in our area. I read reviews, checked websites, and finally settled on one who seemed experienced and straightforward. I called and made an appointment for the following week. I'd never thought I'd be that person sitting across from a lawyer talking about ending their marriage. But there I was. The attorney, a woman in her 50s, was professional and kind. She asked me questions about my marriage, about why I wanted a divorce, about our assets and finances. I told her everything. The lack of intimacy, the disrespect, the years of trying to make it work. I told her about the party, about the 2 weeks of silence, about waking up and realizing I couldn't do it anymore. The attorney listened, took notes, and then explained my options. She told me that in our state, I could file for divorce, citing something called constructive abandonment. I'd never heard that term before. She explained that it's a legal term for when one spouse withholds intimacy and affection to the point where the marriage is effectively over, even if you're still living together. Hearing that there was an actual legal term for what I'd been experiencing made me feel validated. It wasn't just in my head. It wasn't me being unreasonable or demanding. What I'd been living through had a name, and it was grounds for divorce. The attorney walked me through the process, how long it might take, and what to expect. She was honest with me that it probably wouldn't be easy, especially if Susan contested it. But I was ready. I told her to draw up the papers. Over the next few weeks, we worked together to get everything in order. I gathered financial documents, answered questions, and signed forms. And then the day came when the papers were ready. I remember the day I told Susan I was filing for divorce. It was a Saturday afternoon. She was in the kitchen making coffee. I walked in and I just said it. Susan, I filed for divorce. You're going to be served with papers in the next few days. The look on her face went through about 5 different emotions in the span of 10 seconds. First, shock. Her mouth actually fell open a little. Then confusion, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then anger. Her face flushed and her eyes narrowed. She started to say something, then stopped. Then she tried a different approach. She said we'd been together too long just to throw it away. She said I was making a mistake. But I was firm. I'd made my decision, and I wasn't going to be talked out of it. I told her I'd given the marriage years of chances. I'd tried everything I could think of. I'd been patient, understanding, and willing to work on things. But nothing had changed. Nothing was going to change. I was done. She got angry again, said some things I won't repeat, and then stormed out of the room. A few days later, she was officially served with the divorce papers. The process had begun. I thought the divorce would be simple. We didn't have kids. We both had jobs. I figured we'd split our stuff, sign some papers, and be done with it in a few months. I was wrong. I was very, very wrong. Susan contested everything. She didn't want the divorce, or at least she didn't like it on my terms. She hired her own attorney, and together they fought me on every single point. She wanted half of everything we'd built together. Half the equity in the house, half the savings, half the retirement accounts, half of everything. And here's the thing that frustrated me the most. I'd been the primary earner throughout our entire marriage. Susan had a job, but she made significantly less than I did. Most of our assets, most of the money we'd saved, most of the equity in the house, it had come from my income. I'd worked long hours, taken on extra projects, built my career, all while thinking we were building a future together. But my attorney explained that in our state, it didn't matter. We lived in what's called an equitable distribution state, which means marital assets are divided fairly. And fair usually means roughly half and half. It didn't matter who earned more. It didn't matter who was at fault for the marriage ending. The law treated everything we'd acquired during the marriage as joint property and would split it down the middle. The process dragged on and on. There were depositions. where we each had to sit in a room and answer questions under oath while a court reporter typed everything down. There were financial disclosures, where we had to turn over bank statements, tax returns, pay stubs, credit card statements, everything. Susan's attorney painted me as controlling and unreasonable, someone who was trying to punish his wife by divorcing her. My attorney presented evidence of the constructive abandonment, the years of withheld intimacy, the lack of affection, the way Susan had treated me. We argued about everything. We even argued about minor things, things that didn't matter, just because neither of us wanted to give an inch. Months passed. 3 months, 6 months, 8 months. The legal fees kept piling up. Every meeting with my attorney, every court filing, every hour of her time cost money. I was hemorrhaging cash, and so was Susan. But neither of us would back down. This period of my life was exhausting in a way I can't fully describe. I was trying to move forward, trying to build a new life for myself, but I was still legally tied to Susan. I was still having to deal with her, still having to communicate through attorneys, still having to show up to meetings, depositions, and hearings. It felt like I was stuck in this legal limbo where I couldn't fully move on, but I also couldn't go back. About 6 to 8 months into the divorce process, something happened that changed everything. Up until that point, I thought I understood why my marriage had failed. I thought Susan had just fallen out of love with me, or that we'd grown apart, or that she decided she didn't want the same things I wanted. I thought the rejection and the disrespect were just her way of dealing with an unhappy marriage. I was wrong. I had no idea what had really been going on. Once the divorce was filed, Susan seemed less careful about hiding things. I started noticing small changes. She was out of the house more often. She seemed happier, lighter, almost relieved. She'd come home late and not bother making up excuses. At first, I didn't think much of it. We were getting divorced. She was moving on. That made sense. But then, during the discovery phase of the divorce, my attorney noticed something in the documents that Susan's side had turned over. In a divorce, both parties must disclose their financial and phone records as part of the process. It's to make sure nobody's hiding assets or income. My attorney was reviewing Susan's phone records when she noticed a pattern. There was one name that appeared over and over again, dozens of calls, hundreds of text messages, going back not just months, but years. The calls were at all hours. Early morning, late at night, during work hours, weekends. The name was David. My attorney called me and asked if I knew who David was. My stomach dropped before I even answered. I knew exactly who David was. He was Susan's boss. She'd worked for him for years. She'd mentioned him plenty of times. I'd never thought anything of it. Why would I? He was her boss. Of course, she'd talked to him and about him. But seeing his name appear that many times in her phone records, seeing the late-night calls and constant texts, I felt sick. My attorney did more digging. The evidence was piling up, and it all pointed to one thing. Susan had been having an affair. And it hadn't been a recent thing. It had been going on for years. Possibly the entire time our intimacy had been fading. Perhaps the whole time she'd been pulling away from me. The affair was bad enough. Finding out she'd been sleeping with David for years, that all those late nights and business trips had been a cover for an affair, that she'd been getting her intimacy from someone else while rejecting me. That hurt. It hurt badly. But the birth control deception was worse. It cut deeper. Because it wasn't just about her not wanting children. It was about her actively sabotaging our future while pretending to be my partner. It was about her letting me hope and worry and blame myself while she knew the whole time exactly why we weren't getting pregnant. I'd filed for divorce. After all, I was unhappy because I felt rejected and disrespected. But I'd had no idea just how deep the betrayal went. The weeks after I found out about the affair and the birth control lies were some of the darkest of my entire life. I felt foolish. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind? The signs were probably there. They must have been. But I trusted her. I'd believed her when she said she was working. I'd believed her when she said she was tired. I'd believed her when she said we were trying for a baby. I'd been a fool. And the birth control deception made it so much worse. I'd spent years worrying about why we weren't getting pregnant. I'd wondered if something was wrong with me. I'd felt inadequate, like I was failing at something fundamental. I'd suggested we see a doctor, and she'd always come up with an excuse. Too expensive. Let's give it more time. It's normal for it to take a while. And the whole time, she'd been taking birth control in secret. She'd been making sure it would never happen. I felt angry. Not just at Susan, but at myself. Angry at her for the betrayal, for the lies, for the years of deception. Angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, for being so trusting, for wasting so much of my life on someone who clearly didn't value me. The anger eventually faded, or maybe it just burned itself out. But what replaced it was almost worse. I felt hollow, like I'd wasted years of my life on a lie. I'd given everything to that marriage. Even with all the evidence of the affair and the birth control deception, the divorce settlement didn't change much. My attorney tried. She really did. She presented all the evidence to the judge. She argued that Susan's infidelity and deception should be taken into account when dividing assets. But we lived in a no-fault divorce state, which meant that the reason for the divorce carried little legal weight. The judge acknowledged that what Susan had done was wrong, but it didn't affect the financial settlement. Susan still got roughly half of our marital assets, half the equity in the house, half the savings, half the retirement accounts. It didn't matter that I'd been the primary earner. It didn't matter that she'd been cheating. It didn't matter that she'd lied about trying to have children. The law treated everything we'd acquired during the marriage as joint property, and it was split down the middle. The only small victory, if you can even call it that, was that there was no alimony. Because our marriage hadn't lasted 10 years, and because Susan had a job and could support herself, the judge ruled that she wasn't entitled to ongoing financial support. She got her settlement, a significant chunk of money and assets, and that was it. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like she was being rewarded for betraying me. She'd lied to me for years. She cheated on me. She deliberately prevented us from having the family I wanted. And she still walked away with half of everything I'd worked for. The legal system didn't care about right or wrong. It didn't care about who had been faithful and who had been deceitful. It only cared about equitable division, fair distribution, splitting things down the middle. The divorce was finalized almost precisely 2 years after I'd filed. I thought I'd feel relief. I wanted to feel free. But mostly, I just felt tired and empty. It was over. The marriage was over. The legal battle was over. But I didn't feel like celebrating. I just felt drained. The months after the divorce were finalized were hard in a different way than the divorce itself had been. During the divorce, I'd had something to focus on. But once it was over, I was left alone with myself and all the emotions I'd been pushing down for 2 years. I had to rebuild my life from scratch. I moved into a new apartment, a small one-bedroom place that was nothing like the house Susan and I had shared. I had to establish new routines, new habits, a new sense of who I was as a single man in my 30s. I went to work, came home, made dinner for one, watched TV alone, and went to bed alone. It was quiet. I went through all the stages of grief, anger, and regret. The regrets were the most challenging part. I regretted staying in the marriage as long as I had. I regretted not seeing the signs earlier. I regretted wasting years of my life on someone who didn't value me. I regretted being so patient and understanding when I should have demanded respect. I regretted ignoring my gut instinct that something was wrong. There were so many moments over the years when I felt like something was off, but I talked myself out of it. I'd made excuses for Susan's behavior. I'd blamed myself for the problems in our marriage. I tried harder when I should have walked away. But through all that pain and regret, I started to learn some things. Hard truths that I wish someone had told me years ago. The first lesson was to trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I'd spent years ignoring that little voice in the back of my head that was telling me something wasn't right. I'd rationalized it away, made excuses, convinced myself I was being paranoid or unreasonable. But I wasn't. My instincts were right. I should have listened to them. The second lesson was not to ignore red flags. Red flags are red for a reason. They don't go away just because you want them to, or because you hope things will get better. The lack of intimacy was a red flag. The disrespect was a red flag. The way Susan dismissed my feelings was a red flag. The fact that she seemed unconcerned about not getting pregnant was a red flag. I saw all of these things, but I ignored them because I wanted to believe we could work through them. I couldn't. The third lesson was that intimacy matters in a marriage. It's not shallow or selfish to need physical and emotional connection with your spouse. It's fundamental to a healthy relationship. I'd felt guilty for wanting intimacy, like I was being demanding or insensitive to Susan's needs. But I wasn't. Intimacy is a fundamental part of marriage, and when it's gone, the marriage is in serious trouble. The fourth lesson was that self-respect is non-negotiable. You can't love someone into respecting you. You can't sacrifice your dignity and hope that eventually they'll see your worth. If someone doesn't respect you, if they treat you with contempt and dismiss your feelings, you need to walk away. I'd spent years trying to earn Susan's respect, trying to be good enough, trying to make her happy. But nothing I did was ever enough because the problem wasn't me. The problem was that she didn't respect me, and no amount of effort on my part would change that. And the fifth lesson, the most important one, was that actions speak louder than words. It doesn't matter what someone says about the future if their present behavior shows they're not invested in building it with you. Susan talked about having children, but her actions showed she had no intention of making that happen. She talked about our future together, but her actions showed she was building a future with someone else. I should have paid more attention to what she was doing instead of what she was saying. I am learning to be alone for the first time in my adult life. I'm not dating. I'm not on apps, going to bars, or trying to meet someone new. I'm not looking for someone to fill the void or prove to myself that I'm desirable or worthy. I'm just focused on myself. I've thrown myself into my work. I've picked up hobbies I'd abandoned during my marriage. I started going to the gym regularly. I started reading again, something I used to love but hadn't made time for in years. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely. There's a peace in it that I didn't expect. I don't have to manage anyone else's moods. I don't have to walk on eggshells or wonder if I'm enough. I don't have to compromise on every little thing or sacrifice my own needs to keep someone else happy. I can do what I want, when I want, without having to check with anyone or worry about how they'll react. It's freeing in a way I didn't know was possible. I've rediscovered parts of myself that got lost in the marriage. Interests I'd put aside. Dreams I'd put on hold. A sense of who I am outside of being someone's husband. I've learned what it means to be content in my own company, not to need validation from someone else, and to build a life that feels full and meaningful even without a partner. At the same time, I still believe in love. I'm not bitter or closed off to the possibility of finding someone in the future. I'm just not in a hurry. I know now what I won't tolerate. I know what I deserve. I know what a genuine partnership should look like. I'm wiser and more careful, but I'm not cynical. I understand that not everyone is like Susan. My experience doesn't define all relationships. There are good people out there, people who are honest, faithful, and capable of genuine partnership. But I also know that I'll never again ignore my instincts or sacrifice my self-respect to keep the peace. I'll never again stay in a relationship where I'm not valued or respected. I'll never again make excuses for someone's bad behavior or blame myself for problems that aren't mine to fix. I've learned those lessons the hard way, and I won't forget them. I'm sharing this story because I hope someone out there who's in a similar situation, feeling rejected, disrespected, stuck in a dead marriage, will hear my story and realize they don't have to stay. It's okay to walk away. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself. If something feels wrong in your relationship, if you're being rejected and disrespected and lied to, you deserve better. Don't wait as long as I did. Don't ignore the signs. Trust yourself and have the courage to walk away before you waste years of your life on someone who doesn't value you. Life is too short to spend it being miserable with someone who doesn't love you the way you deserve to be loved.